Well, the Supreme Court is putting immigration at the forefront of its current term. On Tuesday, the nation's high court ruled against the family of a Mexican boy shot and killed by a U.S. border agent in 2010. In a 5-4 conservative majority, the court said that the family could not receive financial damages from the officer. The court also heard arguments in a free speech case that could impact the rights of American citizens, and a number of immigration cases are still ahead before the court's end in June. CBS News immigration reporter Camilo Montoya-Galvez joins me now from Washington. So, Camilo, I want to start with this court ruling yesterday in the case of Sergio Hernandez's death. Can you remind us again sort of about the circumstances of this incident? Exactly what did the court say yesterday?
Yes, good afternoon, Rena. In 2010, 15-year-old Sergio and a group of friends were playing near the U.S.-Mexico border in El Paso, Texas. They were running back and forth, essentially between both countries, between both borders, and a Border Patrol agent fatally shot Sergio. President Obama's Justice Department did not prosecute the agent, but Sergio's family in Mexico sued, seeking damages for the death. But the Supreme Court ruled yesterday that Sergio's family could not sue because he was killed on Mexican soil. In the majority opinion, Justice Samuel Alito said the case implicated both border security and foreign policy concerns, and that the court did not want to get in between a potential dispute between Mexico and the U.S. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, however, disagreed in her dissenting opinion, saying Sergio's family should not face a, quote, closed courtroom, end quote. It's important to note also, Rena, that this ruling effectively prohibits other families, like the one of a 16-year-old Mexican teenager killed by another Border Patrol agent in 2012, from seeking damages in the U.S. because their family members were killed on Mexican soil.
Oh, it's so interesting. I see why this is such a big court case and people are so concerned about this. You also say, the courts heard the argument yesterday in a free speech case that'll actually decide whether people can be prosecuted for just encouraging illegal immigrants to remain in the country. What are the issues here that the court considered?
Yeah, at issue here, Rena, is a federal law that says it is illegal to encourage a foreign national to enter or live here in the U.S. knowing that said behavior violates federal immigration law. An appellate court ruled that this law is too broad and unconstitutional because it violates the First Amendment and its freedom of speech safeguards. And advocates fear that if the law remains in place, lawyers, activists, and even family members might get in trouble for helping undocumented immigrants. And some of the justices, Rena, including ones appointed by Republicans, seem to share this concern yesterday during the oral arguments. Chief Justice John Roberts asked what would happen to a grandmother telling her undocumented granddaughter to remain in the U.S. Even Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who was one of President Trump's appointees, talked about someone offering food to an undocumented immigrant and whether that would constitute a violation of this federal law. So there seem to be concerns about the law across ideological lines, Rena.
It's so fascinating to hear their words and so unfortunate. I really wish there were cameras inside the courtroom to be able to hear and see them, but their words say so much. These decisions came after the Trump administration imposed income-based requirements for people applying for green cards and visas on Monday. What is exactly what's called the public charge test, and what effects do you think it could have on legal immigration?
Yes, these new requirements, Rena, represent the most sweeping effort in recent history to change the nation's legal immigration system. And it is all happening without the consent of Congress, right? This is a unilateral move by the Trump administration that will give more power to immigration officials, both overseas and here in the U.S., to deny green card applications from people they determine are or could become public charges on American societies. The term public charge dates back to the late 19th century. It essentially means being an economic burden on the country. And this was an era in American history when the U.S. government actively sought to restrict immigration from non-white countries. And experts believe that these new requirements will cause hundreds of thousands of prospective immigrants to lose their ability to move here to the U.S., and that it will disproportionately affect people from Latin America, Africa, and Asia.
And Justice Sotomayor issued a really harsh dissent in that case. What were the concerns that Sotomayor raised?
Sure. Last month in January, the Supreme Court allowed the Trump administration to implement this public charge regulation across 49 states. But then last week, the Supreme Court also allowed the administration to enforce the regulation in the last remaining state where there was an injunction, in Illinois. So Justice Sotomayor said that she was concerned about the conservative majority's recent tendency to allow the administration to implement these very fundamental policy changes without the cases being decided on merits. Remember that what the Supreme Court did was set aside lower court preliminary injunctions against the policy, so the cases against these regulations are still being argued in court. And so Sotomayor believes that the Supreme Court has sided only with one side in all of these cases.
The Supreme Court's expected to rule on DACA later this year, which is, of course, the program allowing young immigrants to remain in the country. Do these decisions give us any sort of a window, any sort of indication as to how the court might rule?
Well, what we know is that the Supreme Court and its conservative majority have issued in recent months favorable decisions to the administration's immigration agenda, not only with the public charge regulation, but also a sweeping regulation by the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security that effectively renders most non-Mexican migrants ineligible for asylum once they reach the U.S.-Mexico border. But that being said, and this is exhibited in that second case we talked about encouraging unlawful presence here in the U.S., there's also some nuance, and I think it's still key for us to keep tabs on whether people like Chief Justice John Roberts or Justice Neil Gorsuch, who expressed sympathy for these young undocumented immigrants who are shielded by these DACA protections, whether they will rule that the administration did not offer a sufficient rationale for ending a popular program.
Camilo Montoya-Galvez, thank you so much, Camilo.
Thank you, Rina.